Well, hey, as I mentioned earlier, my name is Trey Lavaroni. I'm the Faith Formation Pastor here at St. Paul's. And if you're new here, we are a church that's in what I like to call a liminal space. So liminal space is the time between the what was and the next. And we are a United Methodist church. And with that being said, we have pastors that are appointed 1 year at a time. And for this church, we have had a lead pastor that has been appointed here every year for the last 26 years. He was a really good one. His name's Aaron Brown. And with that, this year, he was actually reappointed to a new church starting next week, to Woods Chapel United Methodist Church in Lee Summit, Missouri. And we have been appointed a new lead pastor in Pastor Britton Fields that will be starting here next week. He's from Plattwoods United Methodist Church in Plattwoods, Missouri in North Kansas City. And Pastor Britton has been a friend of mine for 4 years. We've known each other for 4 years. I've gotten to cheer him on and see his ministry that's taken place at Plattwoods, and it's been awesome to watch. But recently, I was able to sit down with Pastor Britton and ask him about his faith story and his call story. So we want you to take a look, please. Hey, Trey Lavaroni here, pastor of Faith Formation. I'm sitting with Pastor Britton Fields, our new lead pastor starting in July. And today we wanted to take time to hear a little bit about your story, hear about how you came to an active faith in Jesus Christ. And so what was it, Britton, that led you to an active faith in Jesus Christ?
Sure, yeah. Well, first off, hello everyone. I think about how my faith journey began, and really, I've been a Methodist my whole life. I was raised in the Smithton United Methodist Church. I got really involved in the youth group there, and it was this tiny little youth group. But I formed some of the best friendships. Well, then I have the college years, and that's a whole nother story. Maybe you can relate to that. And then I was called back to God in maybe a new way. And I remember a moment of being in a sanctuary and just breaking down, like losing it and realizing like this is what grace is. All the stuff in my past, God can take that and do something with it, can still love me. Yeah. And from that moment forward, I have just been following Christ as best as I know how ever since.
What was that thing that led you from becoming a Christian and taking that step towards being a pastor and going into ministry in that vocation?
I got my engineering degree from Mizzou. I worked for about 7-8 years in that industry, in manufacturing, engineering. I just got the call, so it was little steps over time. Yeah. God just really called me out to this other place. Yeah. And so I remember being in a McDonald's talking with one of my mentors, and he said, we talked about being a pastor. He prayed for me, and then at that moment, I felt the Spirit with me. Drove home, told my wife, and she said, "Okay, let's do this." Yeah. And here we are.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. That's phenomenal. Well, we're so excited to have you here at St. Paul's. Britton's first Sunday is going to be next week on July 4th. Services are going to be at 9, 10:30 here at the Joplin campus, 10 o'clock on KODE, and 10:30 on Facebook. We want you to be a part of that, so make sure to come in person if you're able, but make sure to jump on online or KODE if you're not. But Britton, we're excited to have you, man.
Hey, likewise. Thank you, Trey.
So how come so many of you chuckled when you said the college thing? I heard a lot of chuckling out there. But hey, we're so excited for Britton to be stepping into leadership here at the church, and I know he's excited as well. And our staff and our governing board we're trying to do the best we can in making this transition smooth for the congregation and also smooth for Britton and his family as well, and welcoming Ashley and Shelby and Charlie and Theo, their 3 kiddos. And so there's a couple things we wanted to do to help make this transition a little smoother, and there's 3 things I'm going to ask of you as a congregation. And the first one is this: be praying. We believe that prayer is the foundation of everything we do here at St. Paul's. But be praying for the Fields, be praying for St. Paul's, be praying for Joplin, Carl Junction, and be praying that God uses this to help lead more people to an active faith in Jesus Christ. And the second thing is this: you have 5 new names to learn. You have Britton, Ashley, Shelby, Charlie, and Theo. They have hundreds and hundreds of names that they have to get to know in a little bit of time. And so what I want to ask of you is that every time you see them, please introduce yourself. That could be 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. But by you doing that, you are making your situation a little uncomfortable to make their situation better, because it's better for you to keep reintroducing yourself than putting them in the position to say, "Hey, can you can you say your name one more time? And so what I want to ask for you as a congregation is every time you interact with them, please introduce them. It's kind of like running into like a middle school teacher, right? Like you walk up and you're not sure if they know you or not, and you're like, hey, Trey Laveroni. And they're like, oh, yeah, because it wasn't a good thing why they went, oh, yeah. But it's like, by putting it on the offense, it helps that other person out. And the third thing is this. Britton's first sermon will be on Sunday, July 4th, so next week. So we're going to shoot fireworks off in here, and it's going to be a great time. But no, his first sermon is going to be next Sunday, and then Ashley's going to be joining the church on July 11th, and we're going to do a welcome party for them. And so we're going to have hamburgers, hot dogs, bounce houses. We're going to have an opportunity for us to welcome them and introduce ourselves to them and just have a warm welcome for them, for Pastor Britton and his family. So what I want to ask of you is be here the next 2 weeks. If you're at the lake or something like that, please log in on Facebook, comment, let us know that you're connecting. But it's really important that we give a warm welcome in this time of transition. So those are 3: prayer, names, be here, okay? Got it? Thank you. All right, well, I want to do what we do each week, and that is don't just take my word for it. Dive into the scriptures for yourself. Use the study guide that's available. We have daily meditations that walk you through each day of the week. There's a scripture, and then we're doing something different with the daily meditations, and that's we have serving prompts to help you serve during this time of liminal space, and then we have a prayer attached to those, and then we have a group guide, and the group guide is to help you talk about what we're talking about here on Sunday. I grew up in a culture where you go to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and you never talk about it, right? You just go, receive, and never discuss what was talked about. We want to create a culture where you show up and you participate and you talk about the things that are discussed on Sunday morning, which is what you can do with the group guide. But during this transition, I've been thinking about what it is to be hospitable to a stranger, right? What it is to be hospitable towards a stranger. You see, I grew up in Circoxie, Missouri, 30 minutes away on I-44. Anyone else from Circoxie? One, and then we got one quiet over here, I see. And then, so what we got is, in this small town I grew up in, from kindergarten to 5th grade, there's 2 schools. So there's the grade school, and then there's like a middle school, high school combination. And so what I would do, kindergarten through 5th grade, is I would ride the bus to the high school because my grandma was a middle school teacher there for like 30-something years, Mrs. Agan. She was there for a long time. And when I'd go over there, I would take my bag, let her know I was there, and then after that, she would have to wrap some things up. This could last for an hour, this could last for 2 hours. And so what I'd do is I'd drop my stuff off, and then I'd begin to just roam the halls, right? I'd begin to see the teachers, get to know the teachers, get to know the principals, get to know other students. I just would walk around and begin building relationships with people, and I'd start to realize the teachers you wanted to stop by first because they'd be like, hey, do you want like a Reese's? And I'd be like, absolutely. And then I'd go somewhere else. Hey, the superintendent was the best at like, do you want a Dr. Pepper? Absolutely. And so I would start to go to all these different places, and they would offer me something almost every time I would go. And so I built this new rule where you never go back into the hallway without finishing whatever it is they gave you, because if you were to be walking with the Reese's or the Pop, then someone wouldn't offer you the next thing. And so what I would do is I'd finish my Reese's or my Pop, and then once they were done, I'd say, thank you so much, and I'd walk the room, hey, do you want a Reese's? Yes, absolutely. And so it turned into this culture that was just phenomenal, and luckily I don't still do that today somewhat, but the thing about it is I would begin to get to know all these people. And on good days, I would get to go to the locker room, hang out with the coach. He would take me out to practice with the high schoolers, whether it was football or basketball or baseball. I'd get to hang out with him, be the ball boy, go fetch things in the outfield. I'd get to go catch the football for the kicker. I would get to do all these things. And I began to love after school more than the school experience because it seemed to be, I was the center of attention. What can I say? Like I liked being the center of attention. And so, but it became a place where I was known, I was accepted, I was loved, and I just belonged. Like there never was a question when I arrived after school into that building that I had to wonder if I was known, accepted, or loved. Every afternoon, I would get to receive that and accept that. But I started off as a stranger. I started off as a kid that no one really knew. And as we've been transitioning in this lead pastor role, I've been thinking about what it is to be hospitable towards a stranger. What is it to be hospitable towards a stranger? What does God think about how we should treat the stranger? What does God think about what it is to be a hospitable person? What it is to be a hospitable community as a church and as a city? And I don't think there's anyone in the room that'd be like, yeah, I don't long to be a hospitable person. Like that's just, I don't want to be that, right? I don't think there's anyone in here that would confess that. Maybe some of you might think that, but I don't think there'd be anyone that would say it out loud. But I want us to think about that. What is it to be a hospitable person? What is it to be a hospitable community towards the stranger? Because in American culture, we are living increasingly isolated lives. And COVID kind of it made that really extensive, but even as we're starting to somewhat open up and do different things and connect, I think that culture has been instilled in us as an American culture to live somewhat isolated, to live somewhat separate other than the people that are in our very close circle, right? We have these very close circle of friends and community, and those numbers of even how many people there are is starting to decrease and decrease over time. But we have been instilled in our culture to even not even really associate with strangers, right? Because when you're a kid, what do your parents tell you, right? Don't talk to a stranger. Don't hang out with a stranger. Don't do what a stranger asks. Don't go with the stranger. So as children, and we understand, we all know why we say that, right? Why we instill that in our kids. But the hard thing and the problem with that is it doesn't leave. So we've been instilled through our childhood to not interact with the stranger. And it's not like once you're 16 or 18, all of a sudden it's like, oh, strangers, interact, hi, how you doing? Start talking, I love you. You know, all those, we have that so ingrained in our culture that it's hard to release. And it's hard not to do. And to the point where even our fences are getting bigger, our backyards are becoming the place of activity, our back porches are increasing, our front porches are strictly solely for Instagram, right? Like we take a picture on our front porch, but we don't hang out on it. We just take a picture in front of it. So we have this culture of backyards, not front yards. We have this culture of very close-knit circle of friends, but not really interacting with the stranger. The most we'll do with the stranger is say maybe hi, maybe. And that's possibly it. But the question becomes, what does God say about hospitality towards a stranger? What does God say that how we should treat the stranger and how we should be hospitable towards the stranger? We see in Deuteronomy, we see this story of the Hebrew people. And so the Hebrew people are in Egypt, and they're under the oppression of Egypt. They're slaves under the oppression of Egypt. And while they're under the oppression of Egypt, there arrives this guy who was actually Hebrew, but he was raised by the princess of Egypt. And when he arrives, he sings this song to the Pharaoh, Pharaoh, Pharaoh. Whoa, let my people go. Right? Does everyone know this song? Okay, no, you don't. But no, Moses sings a song because it's always a song, right? And he says, let my people go. Pharaoh says, no, 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 plague, 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 plague. And then finally, after the plague that killed his son, the Pharaoh says, yes, you can go. And so these Hebrew people leave, thousands and thousands of people leave Egypt, and they begin wandering the wilderness. They're heading towards the promised land. They make some bad decisions, so God's like, take another lap, right? You know that coach? Take another lap. You did it wrong the first time. So God keeps kind of saying, take another lap. So he's wandering around the wilderness for 40 years, and God's trying to instill in this community what it is to be human, what it is to be a reflection of God, and what it is to follow and worship God. And so he starts to give them these commands, these laws, these rules to live by to reflect the kind of people he wants them to be. And one of the rules that he gives them very early is this: you are to love those who are strangers, for you yourselves were strangers in Egypt. You are to love the strangers, for you yourselves were strangers in Egypt. That communicates to us that God cares about hospitality, and that communicates to us that God cares about the stranger. And the way in which he helps the Hebrew people understand how much he cares about the stranger and what it is the stranger cares about is by reminding them what happened when they were strangers. He reminds them, remember when you were strangers in Egypt? What was it you longed for? What was it you wanted as a stranger in Egypt? At first they received it. They received goodness when they first arrived because they had a powerful person in their midst that was a powerful Hebrew person in Egyptian leadership. But once he died, the Hebrew people started to step in under oppression of Egypt. And he goes, hey, what was the one thing you wanted while you were under Egypt's rule? What did you want? They wanted love. What does anyone want whenever they're in a new place or whenever they're a stranger? They want love. They want to be accepted. They want to belong. They want to be in a place where they receive love. And that's why he says this. You are to love those who are strangers, for you yourselves were strangers in Egypt. Remember what you wanted when you were a stranger? Love. And for us, we can all connect to that as well. Think about those moments when you were a stranger, right? Have you had those moments when you were a stranger, whether it was at a new school, a new job, a new city, a new neighborhood, whatever it might be, there's these moments when you step in and you are the stranger. I mean, how many of you were born and raised in St. Paul's Church? Raise your hand if you were born and raised in St. Paul's Church. None of you, right? Which is interesting, but the thing about it is all of you arrived here as strangers. The moment you arrived here, you were a stranger. And what is it you wanted, whether here or anywhere as a stranger? Love, acceptance, belonging, right? I asked many of you, what was it that brought you back a second time to St. Paul's? And you would say things like, I felt accepted for the first time. I felt like I belonged. I felt like there was a sense of purpose that had been given to me for the first time. This is where I met Jesus. There was all these moments that you talked about that brought you back for the second time. And the thing about it is, we recognize that all of those things that you mentioned, acceptance, belonging, purpose, all of those things are things that happen on the other side of love. And so when you receive love, you receive acceptance, belonging, purpose, and all these different things. And so when I ask, what is it to be a hospitable person? It's to be a loving person. There's no separation between a hospitable person and a loving person. To be a hospitable person is to be a loving person. So to be hospitable is to be love. And the question that we have to think about, because we know that God cares about hospitality, we know God cares about the stranger, the thing we have to think about is, what does love look like in a hospitable culture? Thank you, Bruce. I love that that's what gets you to clap. Thank you. But the thing about it is, with hospitality, we got to recognize that there's no separation between love and hospitality. But I think with love, sometimes we think of it as this thing that's hard to be tangible. It's kind of mystical. It's hard to get your grasp on. And so what I wanted to do is to better set us up for an understanding of what love looks like. What does love look like? Which means, what does hospitality look like? And the first thing is this. The first thing is we see that hospitality requires sacrifice. Hospitality requires sacrifice. In 1 John 3:16, it says, this is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us. Hospitality, if love is hospitality, hospitality requires sacrifice. When we are called to be a hospitable person, it is to give up something for the other. You have something of value. You have something that means something to you. To be hospitable is to give that up for someone you don't know, which is a lot. It's not just to give it up to someone you love, but God's saying to be hospitable is to give it up to the stranger, which is someone that you don't know. This could be a new neighbor. This could be a new person at work. This could be in a new neighborhood. There's all these different ways in which we run into the stranger. And to be a hospitable person is to sacrifice something you love for someone you don't know. Sacrifice is to give something up at the cost of yourself. Here at the church, St. Paul's has always been committed to sacrificing for next generation. I mean, it's something, I don't think you know this, but for most of you might not know this, but there are not many churches that have existed for 182 years. Because usually in 182 years, there's a generation that says, no, let's keep doing this. This is really good. We like it. So let's keep doing this. But St. Paul's for 182 years has made little shifts over 182 years to keep next generations to an active faith in Jesus Christ. In 1940, that congregation built a new place on 32nd Street where Grace Baptist is now, and they said, we're going to build a new church for new generations because churches either move backwards or forwards. We're committed on moving forward for next generations. And how many of you were here before 1940? Right? Fred Pitts, if he was here, he would raise his hand. He'd get to. But the thing about it is none of us. And so because of the sacrifice of a decision made in 1940, we are all here today because that community decided we're going to be hospitable towards next generations that we don't even know their names or who they are. And so hospitality requires sacrifice as an individual and as a community, recognizing that those two things are inseparable. And that's so that new generations can feel acceptance, belonging, and love. Because the reason we make sacrifices, and the reason I think it's important for us to know that we make sacrifices, is so that we remember what it felt like when we were a stranger. When you start to remember what it felt like to be a stranger, you start making sacrifices so that other people don't feel like strangers no more whenever they come into this place, or move into your neighborhoods, your work, and all those different things. So hospitality requires sacrifice. The second thing hospitality requires is hospitality requires action. It says in 1 John 3:18, it says, let us not love with words or tongue, but actions and truth. Has anyone ever been invited to a place where they didn't feel welcomed? Have you been invited, so you've been asked to go somewhere, you go to this place and you do not feel welcome at all? Has anyone experienced that before? And so for me, we had this tradition when I was in high school. I went to Webb City, and so Webb City played Carthage on their homecoming. Carthage played Webb City on their homecoming in basketball. And when I was a sophomore, we beat Carthage, and I was invited to the homecoming dance afterwards. You want to talk about being somewhere where you were not welcomed. I lasted 10 minutes, and I have two things. There's fight or flight. I might be 6'4", 220, but I'm flight every time, right? So 10 minutes in, nope, not welcome. And I'm out the door. But there's all these places, whether it's in our neighborhoods, our cities, our schools, sadly our churches. There's these places where we say, you are welcome, and then they arrive and they're not. And so to be a hospitable person, it's not just our words, but our actions that matter most. Because we can say someone's welcome, but if they arrive and they're not, that's not what it is to reflect a disciple of Jesus Christ or a church that reflects who God is. And so what we have to do as a community is we have to make sure that we reflect the God in which we worship and be disciples of Jesus, the rabbi in which we follow, and we have to be people that make sure people feel loved and accepted and known as they are from the get-go. This is important that we don't just say you are welcome, but we live it out with our actions. So now that we know that hospitality is love, which means hospitality requires action and sacrifice, I'd like to give us two spiritual disciplines to live this out in our life this week or in the weeks to follow. And the first one is going to be driven towards us as a church. How do we as a church live out a spiritual discipline of hospitality? And then how do we as individuals live out a culture of hospitality towards a stranger? And so the first one is us as a church. I asked if we've had any culture of hospitality, any rules of hospitality in the past, and I was given a yes, and the answer I did not see coming. It is strange, but it's hard to say. So we had a rule that if someone is within the distance in which they can smell your farts, then you should say hello to that person. Now, that feels like he's gone, so I'm around. That sounds like an Aaron Brown way of life. And so we're going to do something different from now on. which is called a 3-minute rule and a 10-foot rule. 3-minute rule and a 10-foot rule, which is about the same thing, right? But the 3-minute rule means this. Did you know that the average newcomer shows up early to church on worship? Because very rarely do we see newcomers that say, they wake up on Sunday and go, you know what I'm going to do today? I'm going to go to church. You know, like that very rarely happens where all of a sudden on one Sunday, it's 9 o'clock at night or 9 o'clock in the morning, and they're like, I'm going to see what local church is open, and I'm going to go check that out this morning. It's not usually how it goes. What usually happens is someone's invited or something's happening in their life and they're looking for a way to get connected and find purpose. So the average newcomer plans to come. And because they plan to come, that means they know what time church starts, and there's nothing worse for a newcomer than to walk in late and fear that everyone's going to turn around and look at you, right? And so newcomers do not usually hang out in the lobby because that's where community is built. That's where people that know each other hang out. What they do is they usually head straight into the worship center and sit down and wait for service to start. And so one of the best ways in which we can be a hospitable community, this is going to be hard for some people, is to show up in here 3 minutes before service starts. 3 minutes before service starts. Not so you can, it's good to prepare your heart and stuff like that, but to sit down and then apply the second rule, which is the 10-minute rule, the 10-minute rule, or 10-foot rule, which is to look around and say, hey, I don't think we've met. I'm Trey. Nice to meet you. What's your name? And if you're like, what if they've been here for 20 years? Then it's good you know their name anyways, right? Like, you're in the same community together. But one of the best ways we can be hospitable is to arrive 3 minutes in here before and to greet those 10 feet around you. And the reason we don't do it during service is because if you say stand up and greet those around you, for a newcomer, it's like, I don't know anyone, And so it's better for us to do it beforehand to help them be welcomed, known, and loved. Because that's the key to why people come, is to be welcomed, known, and loved in this congregation. And then once you get to know them, then introduce them to someone else. There's never too many people that you can get to know in a community. So introduce them to someone you know. So that's the hospitality as us as a culture. The second one is this. Let's create a spiritual discipline of hospitality for you as an individual, and that is to serve a stranger. Serve a stranger. It doesn't matter if they deserve it. It doesn't matter if they earned it. It doesn't matter. I don't care who they are, what they've done. Serve a stranger. And you might be asking, who's the stranger I should serve? Glad you asked, because Jesus gave us a list of people to serve. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus tells the story of a king rewarding people. He says, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." And the righteous people are like, "When did we do these things for you? I don't remember seeing you, Jesus." And he goes, "When you did these for the least of these, brothers and sisters of mine, you did them for me." Now, he's not saying the least of these in a value sense. What it usually is, the least of these are the ones that are not seen. Their value is the same as yours, but they aren't seen. And so you ask, who is the stranger I should serve? The list is hungry people, thirsty people, naked people, sick people, people in jail, or any person that you do not know, which is everyone. This is what it looks like to be a hospitable person to the stranger. Give them clothes, give them something to drink, give them some food, whatever it is they need. That is what it looks like to be a hospitable towards the stranger. Now, the last person I want to talk to in here is maybe the stranger. The person that's maybe walked in here for the first time or watching for the very first time. And this is one of the scariest things you could possibly do, is show up to a church for the first time or even a couple times. And for you, maybe you don't feel known, accepted, loved in life or here. Maybe you just don't feel it at all in your own life. And what I want to say to the stranger is this, that we were all, remember, we were all once strangers here at this place. And the God of the universe, one time, he was whenever they baptized Jesus, the God of the universe declared over Jesus, he said, "This is my son, with whom I love and with whom I'm well pleased. And that was before Jesus did anything of significance or value. He was not Jesus at that moment. He was Jesus, the man being baptized, brought in to start his ministry as a rabbi and savior. And so what I want to say to you, and maybe all of you, is this: the God of the universe says about you right now, as you are his child with whom he loves and with whom he's well pleased. You are loved, you are accepted, and you belong. Please receive that, okay? That is the good news of the gospel, that we all are accepted, loved, and valued just as we are. And so St. Paul's and everyone listening, when we do these things, we are creating a place of belonging, a place of acceptance, and a place of love in our homes, in our churches, in our neighborhoods, in our schools, everywhere in which we live. The key to belonging, God told the Israelites, was love. May we be a people that loves the stranger. May we be a people that loves through sacrifice. May we be a people that love through action. And may we be hospitable in all the ways we can, to all the souls we can, in every place we can, at all the times we can, with all the zeal we can, and for as long as we ever can. That's the good news of Jesus Christ. Let's pray together this morning. God, help us to be a community of love. Help the stranger to feel acceptance, belonging, and love this morning. Help empower all of us to be people of hospitality towards the stranger. People of action, people of sacrifice, and people transformed by your Son, Jesus Christ. And so God, fill us with your Spirit, renew our soul, help us to honor you and walk as your child today and forevermore. It's in your beautiful name we pray. Amen.